as well as a British comedy troupe once said, and now for something completely different. So I'm an engineer, and everyone so far has been talking about things that are very close to, if not inside, the human body. And my field is really to find a way to create environments in which people can live that maximizes their potential in various ways. So this is really about the air that we breathe. And being someone who's been in practice and continues to be involved in practice and in policy, a lot of my research is trying to solve problems that are related to simply getting the kinds of technology that we need, the level of performance into use. So it gets tied up with economics and many other things. So rather than spend the 15 minutes on my own research, which tends to be focused on air cleaners these days and on their performance, I may say something about that later, I want to try to clarify what this issue is. And so my talk is titled Indoor Air Quality and Climate Change, Scylla and Charybdis, or Gordian Knot. For those of you who are familiar with mythology, I think this is really our choice. So I will clarify what that means in a moment. I have to say that this is my third visit to Loughborough, and I've been grateful for all of those opportunities to come. It's been quite a while. I was first here in October of 2013, and you may see some familiar faces there, although looking a little bit younger. And you can see I had a very full-featured experience there, right down to pulling pints in the Griffin. And I came back in 2015 and got out into the Peaks region and got around town. So have really some nice long associations that we're continuing here. But to get back to our problem, what I want to talk about today is the sometimes claimed conflict between providing good indoor environmental quality, specifically indoor air quality in buildings, and the energy impact of that, which is perceived as a negative because of its impact on climate change. But yet, indoor air quality is one of the most important issues of the day, and I would argue that our minimum standards are below where they should be. So what is indoor air quality about from the point of view of actually designing buildings? It's about controlling different kinds of exposures to particles, to chemicals, which may be in gas phase, and actually they may be attached to particles, and also pathogens. And of course, we're all very familiar with the concern about pathogens from the last 3 years. And while this is a true disaster on a scale that I hope we never experience again, it's the only kind of event that could possibly raise indoor air quality in the awareness of the public and in the awareness of government to the level of maybe doing something about it, because the issues that we're trying to deal with here have been known in the scientific community and the research community for many decades, but now there may be a moment of opportunity to do something. So what are the consequences of indoor air quality? They affect many things. Comfort, perception, odors are something we associate with air quality. They affect health in many ways. If we have excessive exposures to things that are toxic, we can have carcinogenesis, we can have respiratory irritation, lots of other problems. But we've become aware through research in recent decades that there are also effects on productivity that are measurable, and that has economic consequences on cognitive function. So not just how fast can you perform tasks, but how well do you think? And so the consequence of not doing what we could do to have high quality indoor environments leads to huge economic loss when you integrate that over entire countries or across the global population. So what can we do to control exposures? I deal mainly with what happens once you fail to simply keep a source out of a building. So what do we do to remove things that have already gotten into the air? Diluting with outdoor air is the most common way to deal with those contaminants, call that ventilation sometimes. We can also use air cleaning technologies to decompose, to capture particles, to inactivate biological contaminants. And these kinds of controls have different costs associated with them. And one of them, particularly for ventilation, is a high energy cost. But the other side of the coin here is that building energy use, which is mostly for the purpose of controlling the indoor environment, promotes climate change because so much of our energy supply is produced by burning fossil fuel. So those carbon emissions are negative and actually create contaminants outdoors that may come indoors, and there are other climate change gases as well. Effects of climate change, these are equally bad. Changes in rainfall patterns, so we have droughts where there weren't droughts and floods where we're trying to live. Increases in extreme weather events that we've all, I think, seen that's actually happening. Sea level rise, and from the point of view of disease transmission, warmer climate, wider dispersion of insects that may carry vector-borne diseases. So this is all very bad too. How do we control climate change? Well, use less energy in buildings because they use a lot of energy. Use cleaner energy sources. This would be the best one. If we could simply convert to renewable energy in a rapid period of time, then we wouldn't be really having this discussion today. Coal and natural gas was cleaner. Photovoltaic, wind, and other renewable sources are really the long-term goal. And as far as carbon, using materials with less embodied carbon. But I'm really concerned here about operational carbon, which is tied very closely to energy use. So what about the mythology here? Scylla and Charybdis, this was the name given to two hazards at the Strait of Messina next to Italy. Homer described them as sea monsters in the Odyssey. And the meaning of that term in modern use has come to be choosing the lesser of two evils, or being between a rock and a hard place, or on the horns of a dilemma. What it means is maybe we have to make a choice between bad and worse. And I think if this is where we are, if those who argue against improving indoor environmental quality win the day, that could happen. And the outcome is likely to favor climate change and energy use for a variety of reasons. So I have to make this argument as often as I can. Oh, and by the way, here's a print from the British Museum. This is a use of Scylla and Charybdis in the 1800s to describe a political dilemma. This is a Pitt in the boat. It has to do with the constitutional change. So to make this point about energy and climate, this is what has happened to energy standards in the US since 1975, when we first created one. There's been a steady reduction in the maximum amount of regulated energy that a building can use. It's a relative scale from 100% over there in 1975, and you get to today, and we've reduced the amount of energy a building can use per square meter by more than 50%. So steady progress. It's not fast enough, but when you compare that with ventilation rates over the last couple of hundred years, there's not the hint of a trend here. If you went back to the time of the 1918 influenza pandemic, actually in those days, the ventilation rates were 30 cubic feet per minute per person based on the recommendations of Billings and Fluga. And at one time, that was the requirement in state codes in the US. Yaglu at Harvard School of Public Health in the 1930s decided that we really didn't need to ventilate that much, and then we would be just fine if we controlled odors. And he did research at the Harvard School of Public Health, which is now saying we don't ventilate enough, that actually gave us our current rates that are around 10 or 15 cubic feet per minute per person. And we've stayed there more or less over the whole period. For a while during the energy crisis, we said in our standards, well, that the minimum, if you do other things, is 5 CFM per person. And everyone who would read those standards would see 5 CFM per person and ignore all of the other conditions that needed to be met. And so here's where we got sick building syndrome. And we've bounced back from that to about where we were before with levels of ventilation that control odors. So not really much progress, not really any kind of consensus. So what about the Gordian Knot, which I call the optimistic approach here? We really have two intertwined problems in built environment. One is how much resource it takes, and the other is what we try to accomplish in built environments. So the Gordian Knot, this comes from also sort of the Greeks. Gordium is a place in Phrygia, and at some point in time, an ox cart was tied to a post with a very intricate knot, and the tradition was that whoever could loose the knot would become the ruler of all Asia. And Alexander the Great came along and he said, well, I would like to be the ruler of all Asia. And it didn't say untie. So he took out his sword and he cut it. And I think we need to view indoor air quality and the outdoor environment in the same way. They're a problem that has to be solved simultaneously and by the most straightforward methods possible. So I would like to think that this is something we can do, and I'll say a few things about what would make it feasible. The first thing, of course, is to acknowledge that energy use and indoor environment are tied together, and that indoor environmental quality should be primary. The World Health Organization said quite a while ago that air and water of acceptable quality should be fundamental human rights. And so I think that's a statement we could support. A friend of mine, Bjarne Olesen from Denmark, who has worked on the European standards, has said a little more bluntly that an energy declaration without a declaration related to indoor environment makes no sense. And that's true, because we could have as little energy use in buildings as we like if we didn't try to condition them. You know, we could be living in shelters again. We also have to recognize that buildings really are a critical piece of the climate change picture, because they're the second largest energy use sector when you add residential and non-residential buildings together. Depending on how you do the accounting, it's about 40% of primary energy use. And about half of that goes to indoor environmental control. So this pie chart shows the average for all buildings in the US that was compiled by the Department of Energy at one time. About 49% of the energy use was going to HVAC. When you add lighting, it's 59%. So it's important. So we recognize that these are both important. We're not going to let either one of those problems go unsolved. But we have to take a step forward on our definition of what is acceptable indoor air quality. What's acceptable now is odor control and levels of known common contaminants that may cause long-term health effects. And I think what we need to do is add to that. Health and wellness is a target. We really want to have people experience the best quality of life they can. And again, quoting the World Health Organization, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. Now, we could talk for a long time about the flaws in this definition, because there aren't many healthy people under any circumstances by it, but it is pointing at the right thing, that we can do more than simply prevent harm. And so we have the concepts of a healthy building and the things we can do to promote wellness. This is the wellness wheel, and it shows that there's much more to being well than to simply not being ill at a given point in time. And in addition to that, we need to start looking even at air quality in buildings from the point of view of resilience. Resilience, when I first heard the term, was about making buildings earthquake-proof or blast-proof or flood-proof. We need to have indoor environments that will resist the kinds of changes that may happen on a short or long scale. So diseases like COVID-19, I think probably everyone recognizes the SARS-CoV-2 virus there, but also outdoor events like wildfires that are being driven by climate change. Our buildings are not really designed to handle those things, and there's some really meaty problems there to be solved in building design to be able to react to events like this and do it cost effectively, and especially to do it in existing buildings where most of the problems are. And We also need to emphasize sustainability. The Sustainable Development Goals came up yesterday. One person noticed I was wearing my Sustainable Development pin yesterday. Keep in mind, sustainability is not simply the outdoor environment. It's not simply using less energy. Climate action is there. Sustainable cities and communities are, but don't forget number 3. And we're failing if we achieve any one of these and do that at the expense of another. All right, so technical solutions. What can we do if these are the goals we're accepting? One is to use outdoor air in the best possible way. We need some, because we just don't know enough about indoor air quality to go without ventilation and rely on air cleaning, although we know that can be done in submarines, we know it can be done in spaceships, but you wouldn't want to pay for it. And I don't think the odor levels are very good in some of those environments either. So energy recovery is widely used. Efficient distribution of air. We realize that the air quality in space doesn't result simply from how much outdoor air we bring in, but do we get it to the right place effectively? And a lot more use of natural and hybrid ventilation. So bringing in air that can be used to dilute contaminants, but also to condition the space without putting an energy burden on the building. And I think alternatives to ventilation are really going to be critical. These are all of the different air cleaning technologies that we could use, everything from mechanical ventilation, filtration that removes particles, to germicidal ultraviolet, which is one of my research areas that inactivates pathogens in the air. And there are a lot of other, maybe some would say sketchy air cleaning technologies that are under consideration, like photocatalytic oxidation and use of ionizers that need to be studied more. But these things will really help us to reduce the reliance on ventilation, which is the most energy intensive piece. And I think the other thing, and this ties in nicely with the resilience idea, is to use smart building concepts to only use as much energy as we need to provide good air quality when people are in a space. You would be amazed at how much energy is used to condition spaces where there are no people. In New York City, when the offices emptied out at the beginning of the pandemic, they were at 10, 20% occupancy, and they were still at 95% of their fully occupied energy use. And so part of that is reimagining what we call demand control. Demand control in buildings today is generally simply measuring the CO2 concentration and turning the ventilation down as much as possible to maintain these inadequate standards that I would like to see changed. But if we start measuring contaminants in the building and using air cleaners and ventilation to control those exposures, then we might really have something good. Policy and regulations need to get better. I talked this morning a little bit about this, that we don't have a true national regulations for indoor environment in many places in the world. Some would say not in any. That's what Lydia Maraska says. In the US, the Environmental Protection Agency can regulate outdoor air, and you have to comply with those regulations. They have no regulatory authority indoors. And with energy, we have national energy standards in the US. This map shows states that have state energy codes that comply with the DOE's recommended national standard, National Standard 90.1. It's not everyone, they're not all the current version, but if this was the state indoor air quality code map, there wouldn't be anything on it. We need policy to help us develop the research funding that we need to solve some of these problems, and also to do retrofits to existing buildings. It's not enough to figure out what the perfect building would look like, because the real problem is the buildings that have been around for decades that are creating bad indoor environments and using lots of energy. So that is my message, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.